There is a moment in every life when effort becomes interference, when trying harder only tightens the knot, when speaking more only deepens the misunderstanding, when chasing faster only pushes what you desire further away. This message is about that moment. Do nothing, not out of laziness, not out of fear, but out of awareness. You have been conditioned to believe that constant action equals progress, that if something feels uncertain, you must immediately fix it. If someone pulls away, you must pursue. If silence appears, you must fill it. If confusion arises, you must control it. But what if the very act of intervening is what disrupts the natural order trying to unfold? Sometimes the most powerful move is restraint. When you stop reacting, you begin observing. When you stop forcing, you begin understanding. When you stop chasing, you begin attracting clarity. Silence is not emptiness, it is information. Distance is not always rejection, it is revelation. Delay is not denial, it is preparation. Your anxiety wants immediate resolution. Your ego wants reassurance. Your fear wants control. But growth requires space. And space only appears when you stop interfering with the process. Do nothing and watch what rises to the surface. Notice who reaches out when you stop initiating. Notice what thoughts persist when you stop distracting yourself. Notice what emotions remain when you stop suppressing them. Truth does not need to be chased. It reveals itself when you create room for it. When you step back, dynamics rebalance. When you withdraw excessive energy, you see clearly where energy flows naturally. What is meant for you does not require endless persuasion. What aligns with you does not demand constant self-betrayal. Doing nothing is not passivity. It is psychological strength. It is the refusal to act from insecurity. It is the discipline to let reality expose itself. If someone values you, they will move toward you when space is created. If an opportunity is right, it will not collapse because you paused. If a connection is genuine, it will withstand silence. And if something falls apart when you stop forcing it, let it. Because what falls apart under stillness was never stable to begin with. Most people act impulsively because they cannot tolerate uncertainty. They send the message. They make the call. They demand clarity. They over-explain. They overcompensate. But urgency born from fear creates distortion. Patience born from awareness creates alignment. There is a deeper intelligence at work in your life, patterns forming beneath conscious control. When you stop interfering with every detail, that intelligence reorganizes your path. The right conversations happen. The unnecessary conflicts dissolve. The hidden truths surface. You think you must constantly push life forward. But sometimes life is waiting for you to step aside. Do nothing and observe who you are without constant reaction. Observe what remains without constant effort. Observe what returns without constant pursuit. Stillness is a test. It reveals attachment. It reveals insecurity. It reveals dependency. But it also reveals strengths. Because when you can sit in uncertainty without scrambling to control it, you reclaim your power. And then something subtle happens. You become magnetic. Not because you tried to be, but because you are no longer leaking energy through fear-driven action. Your calm becomes attractive. Your restraint becomes intriguing. Your silence becomes meaningful. Everything begins to fall into place. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped blocking it. The right people step forward, the wrong ones drift away, the right opportunities stabilize, the unstable ones collapse. The truth becomes undeniable. So after this message, do nothing, do not rush, do not chase, do not explain yourself unnecessarily, do not react to every emotional wave. Sit, observe, allow, and watch carefully. Because what survives your stillness belongs in your life. And what disappears was only sustained by your anxiety. Trust the pause. Everything is already rearranging itself. Restraint is power because it requires strength that most people do not develop. Anyone can react. Anyone can speak when offended, chase when afraid, argue when challenged, or demand reassurance when uncertain. Reaction is instinctive. Restraint is intentional. It is the space between impulse and action. And in that space lies control over the self. The person who reacts immediately is governed by emotion. The person who restrains themselves governs emotion. That difference changes everything. When you practice restraint, you refuse to let temporary feelings dictate permanent consequences. Anger may rise, but you do not let it choose your words. Fear may whisper, but you do not let it determine your decisions. Ego may demand validation, but you do not rush to defend yourself. This is not suppression. It is awareness. It is the recognition that emotions are signals, not commands. By pausing, you observe rather than obey. Restraint disrupts the cycle of escalation. In conflict, most situations intensify because both sides react. One sharp word invites another. One defensive posture triggers more aggression. But when one person remains composed, the dynamic shifts. The expected reaction does not come. Tension loses momentum. Silence becomes stabilizing rather than provocative. The restrained individual holds the emotional center, and that stability influences the entire exchange. There is also power in restraint within relationships. When you stop over-explaining, over-chasing, and overcompensating, you create clarity. If someone values you, they will respond to space with presence. If they depend on your constant effort to sustain connection, their absence will reveal it. Restraint removes distortion. It exposes what is mutual and what is one-sided. It allows reality to surface without interference. Internally, restraint builds discipline. Every time you choose not to react impulsively, you strengthen self-trust. You prove to yourself that you are not controlled by mood, insecurity, or external pressure. That confidence accumulates quietly. You begin to feel grounded because your behavior is no longer dictated by unpredictable emotional waves. You become deliberate. Your words carry more weight because they are chosen carefully, not scattered carelessly. Restraint also protects energy. Constant reaction drains mental and emotional resources. Overthinking responses, engaging in unnecessary arguments, seeking constant validation, these behaviors scatter attention. When you practice restraint, you conserve energy for what truly matters. You become selective. You respond only when necessary, speak only when meaningful, and act only when aligned. That selectiveness creates authority. People sense when someone is not easily provoked or manipulated. In moments of uncertainty, restraint prevents self-sabotage. Anxiety urges immediate action to relieve discomfort. It pushes you to send the message, make the call, demand answers, but urgency often clouds judgment. By holding still, you allow clarity to replace panic. Often, the solution reveals itself without forced intervention. What seemed urgent dissolves. What remains proves genuine. Restraint is not weakness. It is controlled strength. It is knowing you could react, but choosing not to. It is understanding that not every thought deserves expression, not every challenge requires confrontation, and not every silence needs to be filled. The restrained individual is not passive, they are precise. Their actions are fewer but more impactful. Their presence is calm but firm. And in a world driven by impulse, that calm precision becomes undeniable power. Stillness reveals truth because movement often hides it. Constant action, constant noise, constant distraction create a surface reality that feels convincing but rarely penetrates beneath appearances. When you are always reacting, always speaking, always doing, you remain at the mercy of momentum. Stillness interrupts that momentum. It removes the blur. It forces what is real to stand without decoration. When you become still, you begin to notice what persists. Thoughts you try to outrun return. Emotions you buried rise quietly. Desires you ignored resurface without apology. In motion, you can escape discomfort. In stillness, you meet it. That meeting is not punishment, it is revelation. You discover what truly occupies your inner world when there is nothing left to distract you. In relationships, stillness exposes authenticity. When you stop initiating every conversation, stop over-explaining your intentions, stop trying to manage how you are perceived, something clarifies. Those who genuinely value you lean in. Those who relied on your constant effort fade. The dynamic reveals its natural balance. Stillness becomes a mirror, reflecting who is present by choice and who is present by convenience. Truth also reveals itself in conflict through stillness. Instead of defending yourself immediately, instead of rushing to prove your point, you pause. In that pause, you begin to hear more than words. You notice tone, insecurity, projection. You recognize what belongs to you and what does not. Without stillness, you would absorb accusations or escalate defensively. With stillness, you discern. You respond from understanding rather than wounded pride. Internally, stillness reveals motives. Why do you want what you want? Why does rejection disturb you so deeply? Why does silence feel threatening? When you stop drowning these questions in activity, answers begin to surface. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable. You may realize that your pursuit was driven by validation, not love. That your ambition was fueled by comparison, not purpose. that your anger masked fear. Stillness removes the mask gently but firmly. There is also clarity in observing what remains stable when you withdraw effort. If something collapses the moment you stop holding it together, it was sustained by strain, not strength. If it continues naturally, it has foundation. Stillness becomes a test of integrity. What is aligned with you does not require constant interference to survive. In the external world, stillness sharpens perception. When you are not preoccupied with controlling outcomes, you see patterns. You notice repeated behaviors. You recognize cycles. You sense timing. Instead of forcing life forward, you begin to understand its rhythm. Truth often speaks quietly. Only a still mind can hear it. Stillness is not inactivity. It is awareness without agitation. It is the deliberate decision to observe before acting. In that observation, illusions weaken. You see where you are projecting hope. You see where fear distorted interpretation. You see where attachment created anxiety. The more still you become, the less you are deceived by surface appearances. Truth does not shout. It waits. It waits for the noise to settle, for the ego to quiet, for the urgency to soften. In stillness, what is false feels unstable. What is real feels grounded. What is temporary feels fragile. What is lasting feels calm. And gradually, without force, clarity replaces confusion. Chasing creates resistance because it is rooted in the belief that something essential is outside of you and slipping away. The moment you begin to chase, you communicate urgency. Urgency often carries fear. And fear subtly alters your behavior. Your words become heavier. Your tone becomes sharper or more pleading. Your actions lose their natural rhythm. What you are trying to secure begins to feel pressured, and pressure invites distance. When you chase a person, you unconsciously shift the balance of power. Instead of standing as someone choosing and being chosen, you position yourself as someone trying to convince. Convincing requires effort. Effort exposes insecurity, and insecurity is felt long before it is spoken. The other person senses the weight of expectation. Even if they care, the intensity can create space where there was once ease. What might have unfolded naturally now feels forced. Chasing also distorts perception. When you are focused on obtaining a specific outcome, you stop seeing clearly. You interpret neutral behavior as rejection. You magnify small delays into signs of loss. You react not to reality, but to the story fear creates. That reaction pushes further. The more you push, the more tension builds. Resistance grows not necessarily because the desire was wrong, but because the energy surrounding it became imbalanced. In opportunities and ambitions, chasing can have the same effect. When you obsess over results, you disconnect from presence. You rush steps, you compromise standards, you make decisions from desperation rather than alignment. Desperation narrows awareness. It blinds you to alternatives. It makes you cling to one path as if no other exists. That tight grip often suffocates creativity and intuition, the very qualities that attract success. Resistance forms because everything in life responds to energy. Calm pursuit feels different from anxious pursuit. When you are grounded, you move with direction but without panic. When you are chasing, your movements become erratic. You overcorrect, you overextend, you overinvest. The imbalance becomes visible. People and circumstances naturally push back against imbalance because it disrupts equilibrium. Chasing also weakens self-trust. Each time you override your intuition to send another message, to demand another explanation, to prove yourself again, you communicate internally that you do not believe you are enough without persuasion. That internal message lowers your sense of worth. The lower your self-worth feels, the harder you chase. The harder you chase, the more resistance you encounter. The cycle feeds itself. There's a quiet confidence in allowing what is meant for you to meet you halfway. It does not mean indifference or passivity. It means acting with intention, but without attachment to controlling the outcome. When you release the need to force, you restore balance. Space opens. What genuinely aligns with you moves closer without pressure. What does not align gradually reveals its instability. The paradox is that what you pursue too tightly often slips away, not because it was impossible, but because the force applied disrupted its natural movement. When you loosen your grip, you create room for mutual effort. You allow choice to exist on both sides. Resistance fades when pressure fades. What remains is either authentic connection or necessary redirection, both of which are clearer than anything produced through relentless pursuit. Space restores balance because it interrupts emotional overcrowding. When energy becomes excessive, too many words, too many expectations, too many reactions, the natural rhythm between people and within situations becomes distorted. Space clears that distortion. It allows what is exaggerated to settle and what is authentic to surface without interference. In relationships, constant proximity can blur individuality. When two people are entangled in constant communication, constant reassurance, or constant analysis of the connection, clarity diminishes. Emotions intensify beyond proportion. Small issues feel amplified. Misunderstandings multiply. Space reduces that intensity. It allows each person to return to their own center. From that center, interactions become intentional rather than reactive. Space also exposes imbalance. If you step back and everything collapses, you discover that you are carrying more than your share. If you create distance and someone moves closer with genuine effort, you see mutual investment. Without space, imbalance hides behind constant activity. With space, contribution becomes visible. It becomes clear who is choosing the connection and who is simply responding to pressure. Internally, space restores psychological balance. When you are constantly engaging, reacting, or consuming stimulation, your thoughts become crowded. Anxiety grows in crowded spaces. Stillness feels uncomfortable because it forces you to confront what has been ignored. Yet it is precisely that quiet separation from noise that reorganizes the mind. Thoughts slow down. Priorities rearrange themselves. What felt urgent often loses its intensity after a pause. Space is not absence, it is recalibration. It gives emotions time to regulate. When you argue and immediately demand resolution, the nervous system remains activated. Words spoken in that heightened state often create more damage. When you allow space, your body returns to equilibrium. Perspective returns. What seemed like an attack may reveal itself as misunderstanding. What felt catastrophic may reveal itself as temporary. There is also balance restored in desire. When you constantly pursue something, attention, validation, success, you inflate its importance. It begins to dominate your mental landscape. Space reduces obsession. It reminds you that your identity is not dependent on one person or one outcome. That reminder stabilizes you. From stability, your actions become grounded rather than desperate. Space invites reflection. Reflection invites maturity. When you step back instead of pressing forward, you create an opportunity to observe patterns. You begin to notice cycles you were unconsciously repeating. You recognize emotional triggers. You identify where you were overextending yourself. Without space, repetition feels inevitable. With space, change becomes possible. Balance is not achieved through force. It emerges through alignment. Space is what allows alignment to reestablish itself. When you remove excessive effort, the natural flow between people either strengthens or dissolves. Both outcomes are clarifying. Both restore equilibrium. There is strength in tolerating distance without immediately filling it. Tolerance communicates security. It shows that you trust the foundation enough to allow breathing room. And if the foundation is weak, space reveals the truth gently but unmistakably. In that revelation, you are freed from maintaining what cannot stand on its own. When space is honored, interactions regain sincerity. Emotions regain proportion. Decisions regain clarity. What remains after space is not sustained by pressure but by choice. And anything sustained by choice carries far more balance than anything sustained by fear. Uncertainty builds inner strength because it forces you to stand without guarantees. When outcomes are unclear and reassurance is absent, you are left with yourself. There is no script to follow, no predictable response to rely on, no immediate confirmation that everything will unfold the way you prefer. In that absence of certainty, something deeper begins to form. You either collapse into fear or you develop resilience. Most people seek control to avoid discomfort. They want clarity now, answers now, resolution now. The mind believes that certainty equals safety. Yet life rarely offers permanent guarantees. Relationships shift, opportunities change, plans fail. When you depend entirely on predictable outcomes, every disruption feels like a threat. But when you learn to endure uncertainty without panic, you cultivate emotional endurance. Uncertainty reveals your relationship with trust. Not just trust in others, but trust in yourself. When you cannot predict what someone will do, you must rely on your ability to respond appropriately. When you do not know how a situation will resolve, you must trust your capacity to adapt. That self-trust grows each time you survive what you once feared you could not handle. There is strength developed in waiting without self-sabotage. In moments of ambiguity, the impulse to act impulsively becomes strong. You want to send another message, demand clarity, force movement. Resisting that impulse strengthens discipline. It teaches you that discomfort does not require immediate reaction. You learn to sit with tension instead of trying to eliminate it at any cost. That tolerance is a quiet form of power. Uncertainty also dismantles illusion. When the future is undefined, you are confronted with your projections. You begin to see how often you create stories to protect yourself from the unknown. You imagine worst-case scenarios or idealized outcomes. As you practice remaining grounded despite these mental constructions, you gain awareness of how your mind operates. Awareness sharpens judgment. Sharper judgment builds confidence. Inner strength forms when you realize that clarity is not always a prerequisite for movement. You can take thoughtful steps even when the full path is not visible. You can maintain dignity even when someone's intentions are unclear. You can remain steady even when external stability wavers. Each experience of navigating uncertainty without losing yourself reinforces your foundation. There is also humility in uncertainty. It reminds you that you do not control everything. That reminder softens arrogance and deepens wisdom. Instead of trying to dominate circumstances, you learn to collaborate with them. Flexibility replaces rigidity. Patience replaces urgency. These qualities are not signs of weakness. They are indicators of maturity. When you endure uncertain seasons, you begin to detach your peace from outcomes. You recognize that your stability does not need to fluctuate with every delay or unexpected turn. You become less reactive, less desperate for guarantees. The unknown becomes less threatening because you have proven to yourself that you can handle unpredictability. Over time, uncertainty transforms from an enemy into a training ground. It strengthens emotional muscles that certainty never could. Refines perception, builds discipline, deepens self-reliance, and expands tolerance for complexity. You discover that strength is not built when everything is secure and defined. It is built when nothing is assured, yet you remain grounded anyway. What remains after silence is real, because silence removes performance. When words stop, when explanations pause, when effort withdraws, what is left stands without assistance. Silence does not decorate, persuade, or convince. It simply reveals. In that revelation, authenticity becomes visible. Many connections are sustained by constant noise. Messages sent to keep attention alive. Reassurances offered to prevent insecurity from surfacing. Explanations given to maintain an image. When all of that quiets, the structure of the relationship is exposed. If it depends entirely on one person's effort, silence will feel like absence. If it is built on mutual intention, silence will feel like space, not loss. Silence tests foundation. When you stop initiating every conversation, stop filling every gap, stop proving your value repeatedly, you create a pause that invites truth forward. Some people step closer. They notice the shift and respond with presence. Others drift, not out of cruelty, but because their involvement was tied to convenience or habit. Silence does not create this difference, it uncovers it. There is also truth revealed within yourself. When external noise fades, you confront what lingers internally. Which thoughts remain persistent? Which emotions refuse to dissolve? If, in silence, you still feel respect for someone, still feel calm about a decision, still feel aligned with the path, that consistency signals authenticity. But if silence immediately produces anxiety, compulsion, or fear of abandonment, it exposes attachment rather than connection. Silence strips away illusion because it removes immediate feedback. Without constant replies or validation, you cannot rely on external affirmation to stabilize you. You are left with your perception of reality. That can feel unsettling at first. Yet over time, it strengthens discernment. You begin to differentiate between what is sustained by genuine care and what was sustained by constant stimulation. In conflict, silence is especially revealing. When arguments stop and distance settles in, what remains becomes clear. If resentment intensifies and no effort is made to repair, the connection may have already weakened beneath the surface. If reflection emerges and reconciliation follows, the bond has depth. Silence exposes whether pride outweighs care or whether care is strong enough to overcome pride. There is courage required to allow silence. Many people rush to fill it because emptiness feels threatening. They send another message, start another conversation, create another distraction. But when you resist that urge, you give reality the opportunity to show itself. without interference. You stop controlling perception and start observing behavior. What survives silence carries weight because it exists without pressure. A person who reaches out without being prompted is choosing you. An opportunity that remains available after you step back is stable. A feeling that persists even when you try to distract yourself is significant. Silence filters out what was dependent on constant reinforcement. Over time, you begin to trust what endures quiet seasons. You understand that what is real does not panic in stillness. It does not require constant reminders to exist. It holds its place naturally. Silence becomes less frightening and more clarifying. It teaches you that not everything needs to be chased, explained, or maintained forcefully. What remains after silence stands on its own foundation. Anything that cannot withstand quiet was never secure to begin with. So after this message, step back. Let the noise settle, let the tension dissolve, let the unanswered questions breathe without forcing them into conclusions. Do not rush to secure what should stand on its own. Do not chase what must choose you freely. Do not interrupt what silence is trying to reveal. Allow space to do what effort could not. If it is real, it will remain. If it is aligned, it will return. If it is meant for you, it will not require you to abandon yourself to keep it. And if something fades in the quiet, let it fade with dignity. You were never meant to hold together what truth was trying to release. Trust the stillness. Trust the unfolding. Trust that what belongs in your life will survive your pause. Sometimes the most powerful action is the decision not to act. Now, do nothing and watch carefully as everything falls into its rightful place.